Hi everyone, thanks for joining this blog post and specifically this video. This is actually a blog post I've been trying to put together for quite some time. Just a matter of actually getting to sit down and write all this up and make the video and make sure the workflows and UDAs are all ready to go. What this is doing is actually allowing me to build a workflow where I can check if a particular item has changed and what fields have actually changed. So what we're doing here is we have an item in this list. It's got a title field called test01. It's got my number field, which I've set to 1, and I have a country field called USA. Now, if I edit this particular item, and let's say I'm going to change my number to 2, click on Save. What this will do is cause an event that will cause a workflow to kick off. It's called WhatChanged modified workflow. And I go into the workflow history. And this is all debug text, but at the very bottom, it shows you what fields have changed. In this case, my number has changed. It was originally 1.0 and it's now 2.0. If I go back here and actually change this item again, and let's say we change the title, we'll put in tennis and put in 9876 in there and click on save. Again, this will kick off a particular workflow. And if I look at the workflow history, now I have two fields that have changed. Title, which was originally test01, it's now tennis, and my number, which was originally 2.0, and it's now 9876. Now, this is actually quite powerful in that what you can start doing is actually building a workflow that runs when an item is modified and actually catering for that particular change. So think about having a leave request list where somebody submits a leave request. It gets, let's say it was for 1 day, it gets approved by a manager, and then for whatever reason, because permissions weren't modified, the initiator goes back into that item after it's been approved and changes it from 1 day to 10 days. Well, now you actually want to know what has actually changed. So if they have changed the dates, then all of a sudden you now have to resubmit that approval request. So that's one sort of powerful little bit of business logic. Now, how do I do this? There is a web service that comes with SharePoint. It's called lists.asmx. I'm sure a lot of you actually have already used this before. A few of the web methods it exposes really help us here. There's the get list item changes, since token, and also with knowledge. And I'm actually using the since token. And what that means is I actually have to run a workflow once when the item is created to get that token, store it. In this case, we're going to store it in our list item. And then we have another workflow that runs when the item is modified that reads that information, that original token, so that we can use it again to make this call again. So let's have a look at how we do this. I'm going to jump to my first workflow, which is the initial workflow. This is the workflow that runs when an item is created. And all we have here is a simple user-defined action we're going to call. This user-defined action takes two parameters, the item ID, so let's say the particular item you're interested in, and the list name. And that's because the user-defined action is a fairly generic user-defined action, and I'll be able to use that in any list or library in my site or in my farm. So I need to make sure that I have at least these two pieces of information. Now, this is actually doing all the work for us. So if I jump to another tab, this is the initial change token user-defined action. Basically what we're doing is we're making a call to this get list item changes since token. We're filtering on some data, so we're actually passing in the list name, passing in the item ID, and then the result is that it all gets stored in an XML format in a text variable, which we then, ignoring all this logic, which is a whole bunch of looping to do some logging, we're actually making a call again to the list.asmx web service to call the update list items web method. And the reason we're doing that is we're actually storing that XML into that current item that we're working on. So if I jump back to this item here, if I go and edit this item, you'll actually see that I've created a hidden field called change XML, and that contains all that XML that comes back from that web service. Now, ideally, I would only store the actual token ID or the actual token, but for now, I'm just keeping the entire XML in case I need it in the future. Now, The next thing we're going to look at is what happens when an item gets modified. So in this case, this workflow gets kicked off. It's the WhatChanged modified workflow. And again, we have another user-defined action we're calling. It's called get modified fields. So let's open this up. You'll notice there's a few more pieces of information that we're passing in. First of all, we're passing in the content type because we need that to actually figure out what's changed in a particular item. The other thing we're passing is the item ID, which we did in the previous UDA, and also the list name. But what's really important is this fields field right here. This is a comma separated list of fields that we're interested in, because really there's a bunch of fields that are available in a list item. There's the ones you can see in the view. There's also some hidden ones. There's also some other fields that you have as well in your SharePoint list item that you're not necessarily interested in if they change. For example, if modified, you don't really care maybe about the modified date. You can look that up. You don't really care what the original one was and what the new one is. So this allows you to actually filter down on specific fields you're interested in. In this case, I'm just interested in title and my number. We also have output parameters for this one. We have the fields. So all these are collections. This is going to return me all the fields that have changed, all the before values, and all the after values. So for example, if the title field has changed, I will have one value in here called title. I will have its before value, and I will get its after value in this collection. And then what we're doing in this particular workflow is we're just iterating through all the fields that have changed, pulling out the before value, pulling out the corresponding after value, and then we're just logging that which we saw when we looked at that workflow history right here. So you can see we may have one field, we may have no fields that have changed, we may have all the fields have changed, and we'll log all that information. So ideally, when you're actually building out a workflow, you would have this particular UDA, and then after that, you would have a whole bunch of other business logic in your workflow. And if you want to do something special for a particular field that has changed, then you could actually check in these collections, pull out the appropriate values, and then have a whole bunch of other workflow logic around that, maybe approvals, whatever it is you may need to do. Now, how does this user-defined action work? So let's have a look at that. So here's this user-defined action. Now, it is a little bit more complex than the original one because we're doing a little bit more work here. In this case, because we're passing in a list name, we actually need to pull out the list ID. So again, we're making a call to list.asmx. Pretty powerful little web service that comes with SharePoint. This case, we're actually pulling out or making a call to the getList web method. Again, get a bunch of XML back. We're querying that to pull out the actual list ID so we can store. We have a query list action that is querying that original list to pull out that XML that we saw originally, that we originally stored. And from that, we're extracting the actual token, and the token looks something like this. Once we have that, now we need to make another call to our getList item changes since token web method, because this time we're actually passing in again the list name, the item ID, but if we scroll down a little bit, we're also passing in that change token. Right, so now it has a way of actually comparing what changed from the previous token we have to what the current value is. Now, assuming that is all fine, we're going to pull out some information out of the XML to actually make sure that items have changed. For example, there may be nothing that has changed. In that case, we're just going to go down the left branch of this set of condition and the UDA will actually complete. If on the other hand, something has changed, then we have a whole bunch of logic in here. And I'm not going to go through every single bit of this, but we're pulling out some the actual token. So we now have an updated token, which we'll need to go and update that item. We're also making some other web service calls, getting the content type information, the content type ID. Cleaning up a few things. Now we're actually splitting up those original field names that we passed in so that now we can actually iterate through the information we got back from the web service to see if actually anything has changed. And if we continue scrolling down, again, we're iterating through a few things, getting the old value, getting the new value. This is doing a comparison. Make sure that the old value is different to the new value. If it is, then these actions here are actually going off and storing the results in those collection parameters that we're passing in. So in these parameters that we've passed in down the bottom. And finally, once we've gone through all that, then we make that final web service call again to list.asmx to update list items, to update that XML that we keep in that item, in that field. So now the next time this same item gets modified, we'll have the latest token. We'll be able to run the workflow, compare all those fields to what they were previously, and now we can actually pull out that information. So hopefully this is quite helpful. I've had this request a number of times over the years as to how to do something like this, and I've actually now finally got these two user-defined actions that we can reuse very easily and in any number of workflows. So if you have any questions, any comments, please shoot me an email. My email is available on my website. And again, if you have any suggestions of any other blog posts you'd be interested in seeing how to do certain piece of functionality with Nintex workflow, Nintex forms, please reach out. Thanks for listening in.